Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Rescued from the Depths by Ella Maven, narrated by Heather Costa and Jeffrey Kafer. Chapter 1. Sierra. Water everywhere, up my nose, in my mouth, filling my lungs. As I peeled open my eyelids, salt stung my eyes. Flailing my limbs, I felt like I was spinning in a washing machine. Gasping for breath, all I got for my efforts was another gulp of water. Where was I? A few shapes passed in front of me, but the water was too dark to make out what they were. Sharks? Panic set in as I couldn't seem to remember how in the hell I'd gotten into water in the first place. My lungs burned, my energy was flagging, and all I could do was stare helplessly into the murky depths. Then a memory crashed into me. I was watching some survival show, and the host said if you found yourself underwater and couldn't figure out which direction the surface was, then watch the bubbles rise. I burped out what was left of the air in my lungs and watched the bubbles drift above me. I struck out that way, muscles screaming, just as some long rope-like object passed in front of me. I hesitated, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. After what felt like hours was probably only a few seconds, the top of my head breached the surface. I gagged and sputtered, a mix of coughing up the water in my lungs and inhaling as much air as I could. Treading water, I gazed around me at the dark sky. A few stars and a large moon provided enough light for me to make out the shape of a few objects bobbing on the surface near me. Was there a shipwreck? But I had never been on a ship. I knew because I would have been seasick. The last thing I remembered, I'd been at my friend's house dog-sitting. And now I was here in the ocean. What the hell? I lived in Ohio. I spun around in a circle, desperate for something to hold on to. A piece of driftwood, a barrel, a door a la Titanic. My eyes caught on something large, and I struck out toward it. I was nearly there when the object moved, twisting around until two large orbs caught the light of the moon. I cried out, catching a mouthful of salty water as a mouth hole opened in a V-shaped face, revealing sharp teeth. "There you are," it said. But the audible words didn't match the formation of the mouth. My head pounded, and my heart dropped into my feet. A clawed hand wrapped around my wrist, and I screamed. "She's here!" the creature called out and tugged me toward a small grouping of the same things, all bobbing on the surface near what looked like a shredded piece of styrofoam. "Please," I whimpered, tugging at the creature's grip as its claws dug into my wrist. "Signal sent," said a voice from the grouping of creatures. "Rescue should be here soon. You will receive a commendation for recovering the shipment." Shipment? Wait, was I the shipment? What? Where are we? I choked out. The creature holding my wrist turned and narrowed his glassy orbs at me. "You don't ask." Suddenly a long, fleshy tendril rose out of the water, and I spotted large tentacles lining the underside. Dozens more tentacle arms launched out of the water, sending salty spray into my face, and the grouping of creatures began to holler and hiss in panic. A tentacle arm wrapped around the creature holding my wrist, and he was yanked below the surface. I went with him, managing a gulp of air before I was plunged underwater. I opened my eyes, and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature holding my arm no longer had a head. I opened my mouth and screamed. Bubbles rushed to the surface as I tugged my hand from the lifeless grip of the now dead creature and swam upward. I could make out thrashing at the surface, and below me, massive shadows seemed to reach for my feet. I broke the surface in time to see chaos. Tentacle arms smacked the surface as one by one the grouping of creatures was pulled below. A few suckers wrapped around my ankle tentatively. I screamed, but just as quickly as they touched me, the suckers were gone. I treaded water, my muscles burning with effort as I watched the darkness of the water shift color with what I could only assume was blood. "Oh, God," I panted, feeling the hot tears mingle with the cold water on my cheeks. "I'm going to die." I spun around, catching a few tentacle arms undulating below the surface around me, like sharks circling. "Please," I whispered on a last gasp to no one. "Help me." Tentacle arms wrapped around my waist and wrists. No! I called around, struggling against the grip, even though I knew there was no point. Except these arms didn't hug me below to be eaten limb by limb. Instead, I was pulled in a decisive direction. I tossed my wet hair from my eyes and squinted in the distance where I could just barely make out a large form on the ocean surface. Whatever was pulling me picked up speed, and I had no choice but to close my mouth, breathe through my nose, and hope for the best. The form grew larger and larger until I realized it was an island? Land. What? I whispered as we drew closer. The arms seemed to lift me over the waves of the incoming tide, and just when I thought I'd be in the ocean forever, my toes grazed sand. The tentacle arms let go, and I fell onto my hands and knees on a beach. The pebbles of the sand cut into my skin, but I didn't care. I was on land. I heaved and spit water until my throat was sore, and only then did I crawl out of the tide. I couldn't see much of anything in the dark. What was on this island? Who brought me here? I whirled around, wondering if that tentacle creature was coming out of the water to finish me off. But I could see nothing, only gentle waves lapping at the sand. Then my eyes caught on something, so fleeting I swore I missed it. A round object bobbing on the surface, and 2 purple glowing gems. But then it ducked out of sight, and I blinked. Surely I was seeing things. Exhausted beyond belief, my survival instincts at a near zero, I managed to make my way further inland to the edge of the sand, where a large tree provided some cover. I flopped onto a crinkly fallen leaf, as large as a twin bed, and closed my eyes. I fell asleep to the sound of lapping water and the night wind rustling the branches over my head. I opened my eyes, expecting to see the seafoam walls of my bedroom apartment, and instead I saw an actual sea. Wait, hadn't that been a dream? I sat up so quickly my head spun. Groaning, I rubbed my forehead and blinked at the very direct, very bright, very hot sun. Memories of the night before came back to me, and for a moment I could barely breathe. I closed my eyes. This has to be a dream. A dream. Wake the hell up, Sierra. But when I peeled back one eyelid, the view was the same. Rippling sea, beach. The ground crackled beneath me, and I glanced down to find a purple leaf. Casting a look farther inland, blue vegetation greeted me, growing from greenish dirt. What the actual fuck? This didn't make sense. I was in some weird upside-down world. Slowly I stood, using the thick branch of the tree next to me. When I dug my fingers into it, the mushy bark came away in strings like a banana peel. Ick, I muttered, wiping my hands on my clothes. I wore a pair of leggings and a large t-shirt, which I already knew I was going to have to remove or alter in this heat. At least for now it would provide some protection from the sun, because one of my first worries was baking like a lobster. I had no shoes, and the ground was spongy beneath my feet. The blue grass was soft and matted down with each step I took, making my path easy to track. I paused, considering my footprints. Should I have been worried about that? Whatever. I couldn't lounge on the beach forever and order takeout. I had nothing on me but my clothes and a hair tie, which I promptly used to tie back my hair into a knot. As I walked, I realized the island increased steadily in elevation. It wasn't steep, but I could tell I was walking up. The grass gave way to a denser fern-type vegetation beneath my feet. I found various mushroom-looking plants, but I knew better than to eat one of them. I was hoping for a random banana plant. A coconut tree? I squinted up at the branches above me, but I saw nothing except blue and purple leaves. Gorgeous, but not exactly edible. My stomach cramped, and I knew my first priority was water. I could go a while without food, but fresh water? That was a necessity. And soon. I couldn't remember the last time I had anything. My tongue was thick in my mouth, and my throat was raw from all the salt water I swallowed. I listened for the sound of running water, but the crashing of the waves offshore drowned out most of the activity around me. Eventually my legs grew tired, and I stopped at a dense patch of ferns and sank down onto them. I dropped my head in my hands, trying to make sense of where I was. But this wasn't like any place on Earth. Blue grass, purple trees, green dirt, and most of all, what were those things in the ocean? They'd talked and... Wait, how had I understood them? I pressed on my ears and winced when my fingers prodded a lump behind my left ear. Some sort of hard device, about the size of a quarter, was lodged into my skin. Swiping at it, I only caused myself more pain and eventually gave up. This was alien. I'd been avoiding that word until now, but there was no other way to describe my circumstances. This place was alien. Those things in the water had been alien. I had a sinking feeling in my gut I wasn't on Earth anymore, and I felt crazy even thinking that. Suddenly, a rustling above me caught my attention. I peered up, and for a moment I thought it was just a breeze before 4 large eyes peered down at me. I went still, terrified of what was connected to those large eyes, when a 2-fingered hand, grasping a branch like a chameleon, crept closer. Those 4 eyes belonged to 2 heads, which were connected to the same body. Their faces were very round and flat, with a furry body and 4 legs. A long prehensile tail wrapped around a trunk, and the 2-headed monkey-like creature swung closer. Anything with a mouth can bite, my mom had said when we toured a zoo, and I asked if a giraffe would bite me. I stared at this thing's mouth, wondering if it was a meat-eater, as the branches seemed to come alive with more 2-headed monkeys. It dropped to the ground in front of me and beat its chest before calling out a loud whoop that sent the pack into a frenzy. "Oh shit," I muttered, stumbling to my feet as they began to crowd me. Was this how I was going to go out? I'd survived a tentacled giant squid thing in the water, and now I was going to be taken out by the planet of the apes? "Shoo!" I hissed at them, waving my hands. They startled at that, a few retreating just slightly before once again pressing forward. "Go home!" I shouted before trying to make myself as big as possible. "Fuck off!" I turned and ran. I knew in the back of my mind I wasn't supposed to run from a predator. Their natural instincts would be to chase. But I physically couldn't make my body do anything else. My flight response had kicked in, and I was off. I wasn't the best runner, but I played in a recreational soccer league, so it wasn't like I didn't know what I was doing. Still, I knew without a doubt I'd never run this fast in my life. Crashing sounds and loud whoops, hollers, and shrill calls spurred me on to pump my arms and my legs. I swore I could feel their breath on my neck and their hands grasping at my clothes. So I started yelling too, nonsense at the top of my lungs as I burst out onto the beach. I ran until I reached the water, and only then did I turn around to face off against this pack of monkeys. Except they didn't step foot on the beach. In fact, the island now rang with silence. I could see a few of them in the trees just offshore, swinging lazily like they hadn't just chased me for a mile. Eventually they retreated completely, with a last few low calls, leaving me alone on the beach. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but it seemed they'd drawn a literal line in the sand. Inland was theirs. The beach was mine. I sank down into the water, lapping at the shore, not caring I was wet again. This meant I was as good as starved. I'd find no fresh water here. As far as food, maybe I could learn to fish. Tom Hanks did in Castaway. Some people on Survivor did it. Just the thought of it filled me with exhaustion. I was already so tired and hungry that my stomach was cramping. How the hell was I going to survive this? Not even bothering to stand up, I crawled back to the leaf where I'd spent the night. Halfway there, I lifted my head and paused mid-crawl. A few vessels sat near my leaf. Placed there deliberately, I spun around frantically, looking for a companion, another living soul other than me and the monkeys. But I saw nothing. No one. I crept closer and found a large pitcher as well as a bowl filled with what seemed like food. I sniffed at the pitcher and smelled water. Fresh water. Tipping it slightly, I let a few drops spill into my hand. Testing them with my tongue, I could barely believe it. This was fresh water, although with a slight vinegary taste, just sitting here in a pitcher. For me? It's like Stranded Island DoorDash, I muttered. What the hell? I tipped the pitcher and drank. Fuck it. If this was poisoned, it would be a better way to go than dying of dehydration. The water was cool, fresh, and oh so fucking good. After drinking a quarter of it, who knew when my delivery would return, I poked at the contents in the bowl. A few fleshy balls that smelled like citrus fruit, and they tasted like a sweet grapefruit. There were also some thick roots shaped like ginger that had a cashew-like taste. I ate as much as I dared before wrapping the rest in a fresh leaf and stowing it in a hole I made in the mushy bark of a nearby tree. As for the pitcher, I draped a leaf over the top and then secured it with my one beloved hair tie. Hair loose in the wind, I sank down onto my leaf and stared out into the ocean. While the food and water could have belonged to someone, there was something about the way it was placed, right near my bed spot, that seemed very deliberate, like it was meant for me. So someone had left me this food and water. But who? What? And why did they disappear again? I dropped my chin on my knees. Well, I was going to find out. I'd stay right here, awake, until the someone showed up again. At least I had something to look forward to now. Something other than starving.
Chapter 2. Quist. I watched as the female drank the qua I'd provided to her. Her small fingers shuffled through the food I had carefully selected for her. I had picked those guara fresh for her, and had given her only the best grut sections for my supply. I wasn't sure what else she could eat. She looked so small on the sand. I'd only seen one other like her before. She'd had purple hair and had been bonded to a warrior like I'd been before. Long ago. In another life, it felt like. The freshest lapped at my tentacles where I hid, watching the female. I wasn't sure what she was. Definitely not Drexonian like me. But it didn't really matter what she was. She was female, alone and vulnerable. It was obvious she wasn't familiar with this place, as she'd been on a crashed aircraft driven by some Harazians. She would have been eaten in the freshest by the massive port crullers. They'd gotten to the Harazians, if it wasn't for me. I would have liked to return her to her home, wherever that was. But this was the best I could do since she couldn't breathe in the freshest. Her gasps and gurgles as she struggled under the salty qua filled me with anger. She belonged somewhere safe and happy. The Munkas wouldn't step foot on the sand. They knew I was here, and while Munkas weren't my favorite taste, I wouldn't hesitate to kill one for their stringy meat. They knew it, so they'd stayed inland. The female seemed to understand as long as she stayed on the sand, she was safe. For now. I admired her quick, critical thinking. I growled in frustration as my Cora pounded in my chest. I so very badly wanted to touch her to see if her skin was as soft as it looked. What would her hair feel like between my fingers? Then I stared at my tentacles and fingered the gills in my neck. I couldn't face her. Even out of the freshest, when my tentacles shrank, I was still an abomination of my former self. She'd be terrified, and rightly so. It was best to stay out of sight. I stayed still and watched her until my muscles ached and my eyes burned, but I refused to retreat to my cave. What if something happened to her? What if the Munkas grew brave? I couldn't leave. She needed my help, my protection. Her eyes were alert and her muscles taut beneath her skin. On her world, I was sure she was strong and capable, but not here, where things were unknown. She jumped at a slight noise, and when a tant buzzed around her head, it was the size of her hand. She took off on a sprint into the tide of the freshest, screaming and shrieking. All her words didn't translate through my implant, but I got the sense she was cursing the tant with all her worth, which made my lips turn upwards into the first semblance of a smile I'd had in many cycles. Her tight clothes, now wet, clung to her curves, and I couldn't take my eyes off the hardened buds poking out from her breasts. My mouth watered, and my tentacles reached in her direction without my bidding. Every part of my body wanted her, but there was no way I'd even let her see me, let alone get close enough to touch her. She waded out into the freshness up to her waist and stared out toward the setting sun. Her dark hair, wavy and windswept, fluttered around her face. Her pale skin had pinked, and I wondered what that color change meant. A few dots had appeared on her shoulders and face. Was that camouflage? I hoped it wasn't a sign of sickness. I inhaled deeply, but she didn't smell ill. Instead, her scent was divine. When the sky darkened, she made her way with slow steps back to her leaf and collapsed onto it. Her eyes shone in the dark, but her eyelids seemed to be closing. She jerked awake several times until her body eventually slumped over. Her eyes remained closed. Finally, she rested. The monkas wouldn't venture onto the sand in the dark, and I'd already placed a protective ring of remus herbs around her leaf to protect her from any of the insects and other vermin on this planet that could harm her or mar her skin with bites. This was my time to gather more supplies. She'd be here a while until I could find a way to take her somewhere she'd be cared for. I dove into the freshness, letting the cool liquid wash over my gills. Just like the time I had saved that other female from porch coolers, this was one of the only moments I was glad for my mods. Snatching a huppus swimming in front of me, I stuffed it in my mouth. Stomach full, I went in search of supplies for my female. I didn't dare take long, as every moment with her out of my sight felt like an eternity. When I returned with my supplies, I crept up onto the sand, taking care to remain in the shallows. My tentacles slowly shrank into my ribs, and my gills closed as I used my mouth and lungs to breathe now that I was on land. Laying the covering on top of her, I carefully placed the rest of the supplies around her so she'd see them when she woke. I went to replace her water and found that she had cleverly covered the pitcher with a leaf and some sort of rope. I poked at it with my claw. The material was blue and yellow striped, and it stretched before snapping back against the outside of the pitcher. The sound startled me, and I froze, glancing at the female to see if I'd woken her. But she slept on. Content she'd wake to what she needed, I went to retreat to my cave for a brief rest. I couldn't resist stopping by her sleeping form and crouching down to get a better look. Her skin was still pink, and I could feel a slight heat emanating from her skin. I began to worry she was ill. She needed better shelter to rest. As quietly as I could, I rearranged the leaves over her head, securing them in place with vines so they'd provide cover from the sun's hot rays. After rubbing some remus herbs on the shelter, I took a step back and surveyed my work. While it wasn't a home, it was better than laying out in the open under the stars. She made a small sound, and I froze, but she only wrinkled her nose and remained asleep. Her lips were slightly parted, and I knelt at her side as I studied them. The blunt tips of her white teeth poked out, and I made a note that she wouldn't be able to tear into tough meat. With her this close, I could barely breathe, captivated by her smell and soft breaths. I ached to touch her, and my cock stiffened. I shifted, uncomfortable, and touched it with the flat of my palm. When I felt the hardened shaft, I froze. My cock had responded to her, and I didn't know what to make of that. Never in my life had I been hard. I knew how it worked. I'd learned about pleasure like all Drixonian youth. But since all our females died when I was a chit, I'd never thought I'd experience arousal. And now this female, this tiny thing stranded here with me, had awakened what I thought was long dead inside of me. Now I understood why the Drixonian warrior who had crashed with a female in the freshest that one rotation had been so desperate to save her. Had he felt this way about her too? If only I hadn't been like this, I would have spoken to them, maybe returned home. No, my home was here, alone, and as long as the female was here with me, this was my purpose. Her, only her. As I'd been taught all my life, she is all. The Drixonian warrior in me wasn't dead. He was awake, and he'd go to battle for her.
Chapter 3. Sierra. I opened my eyes and groaned, not because I'd woken up on this damn island again, but because I'd woken up at all. That meant I'd fallen asleep, and I'd been determined to stay awake. I'd slept so long, and I was surprised the sun hadn't woken me. I frowned as I realized I was in shade. Glancing above me, I saw a canopy of leaves densely packed together. They hadn't been that way before, had they? A heavy weight covered me, and I panicked a moment before I shoved it down to my waist. My fingers closed around softness, and I stared at the blanket covering me. At least, I was pretty sure it was a blanket, although it was made of a material like I'd never seen before. Or actually, I guessed it was a type of dried plant or fern woven so densely together and covered in a type of velvet-like fuzz. I ran my fingers over it, marveling at the intricate knitting. This was handmade, no doubt about it. Also beside me was a mud bowl, and inside was a... Ah! I screamed as an eyeball stared back at me. A fish-like thing lay on its side, motionless. I poked at it, but it didn't move, and it was then I saw the stomach was slit open. Someone had killed and gutted this fish for me. And if that wasn't enough, a pile of steaming rocks was nearby, keeping me warm, and also providing a way to cook the fish. There was a restaurant near me at home where my friends and I had cooked raw meat on hot stones, and that had been fun with some cocktails. I never thought I'd actually need to do this in the wild to survive. I crawled toward the rocks and glanced back to see that the leaves over top of me hadn't grown like that on their own. Someone had created a small shelter over me, complete with vines tying branches in a makeshift tent. As nice as this was, my stomach soured at the thought someone, something, had been here while I slept. What was its purpose for doing this? Was it fattening me up to eat me? Too hungry to contemplate it now, I picked at the fish, slowly peeling off the scales and laying the pinkish meat on the stones. Sizzling followed, and the meat cooked in a minute. When I tasted it, it reminded me of salmon. I washed it down with my water, and then sat staring at my new possessions. My only possessions. Near my water pitcher was a leaf bundle I hadn't noticed before. Picking it up gingerly, I heard a slight rattling inside. I slowly snapped the dried grass, tying it together, and out dropped a pile of tiny, glittering, colorful stones. It was a necklace, held together by a strong piece of dried vine that stretched slightly. I let it drop back into my lap, staring in confusion and wonder. I hadn't been given only supplies to keep me alive. This was a present? A gift. This wasn't some weirdo feeding me to make me a better meal. You didn't give gifts to your food, unless that was some ritual on this planet. I squinted around me, head spinning with questions. I dropped the necklace over my head and marveled at the way the colors sparkled in the sun. They looked a bit like sea glass, but the hues were much more saturated, so much that they didn't even seem real. I let it fall onto my chest, enjoying the slight weight. I dropped my chin on my knees and stared out into the ocean. Who was out there? For the next 2 days, I didn't stray far from my leaf. Several creepy critters ventured around me. One looked like a centipede the size of a house cat, but none got too close. I couldn't figure out why. The few times I moved outside of my shelter, the rustling in the brush got too close for comfort. I walked down to the ocean to relieve myself when I needed to. The water was fairly clear, and I could see my toes wiggling in the wet sand. Of course, there was one afternoon where I cried for a few solid hours. I wasn't a psychologist or anything. I was an elementary school teacher, but I knew I needed to mourn. I didn't think I was getting back home, mainly because I didn't think I was even on the same planet as home. I cried for my parents who were probably frantic, my friends who most likely were on Facebook with constant search updates. I cried for my students who would have to have some sort of assembly while the administration struggled to explain the disappearance of Miss Paul. Once I dehydrated myself, I refused to wallow. I picked myself back up off the sand and did a light jog up and down the coastline, never straying far from my leaf. I was sure I'd have other moments where I felt the crushing weight of loss, but I had reached my limit today. The gifts continued. More seafood. One was a crustacean that tasted a bit like shrimp when I cooked it. Another piece of jewelry I wore around my ankle. By this time, I'd ripped my leggings into bike shorts and hacked at my shirt until it was a crop top. I saved the extra fabric, using the leggings as potholders to handle the hot rocks. It wasn't until the third day I got the courage to do a little exploring. First, I was bored, and second, I couldn't rely on this faceless thing for my survival. I was going to need to learn what kind of food was on this island and where I could get it myself. That and water. I decided to avoid the forest inland, but that didn't mean I couldn't walk the beach, right? I gathered my supplies and placed them under my small shelter, taking with me a bit of food and some water in a small watertight pouch my invisible friend had left me. After that, I began to walk. Occasionally, I'd venture as close to the tree line as I dared to plunge a stick into the mushy bark, acting as honorary breadcrumbs so I could find my way back. The last thing I wanted was to get lost on this stupid island. I had grown fond of my food, and water, and blanket. The sun beat down on me, but if I pretended I was on Earth, I could just barely make myself believe I was enjoying a stroll on a private beach. I eventually had to walk along the edge of the water, as the sand was too hot on my bare feet. I couldn't deal with my shorts either, so I took them off, leaving me in my underwear. Exposed? Yes, but there was no one here to see me. The monkey things had their genitals hanging out, so why couldn't I strut in my undies? Just like when I was inland, I felt the elevation of the island begin to rise as I walked along the curve of it. Soon the beach ended, and waves crashed around large white rocks. Here the rise was steeper. I kept going, grunting as my toes tried to find purchase on the rocks. I was eager to be able to get a better view of the island and the area around me. The island looked like it was shaped like a teardrop, the low rounded end where I washed up on the beach, and the other rose swiftly into the air to peak on a cliff. I stopped a few times for a snack and a drink of water. I had no idea of the time, but the shadows of the trees nearby had lengthened, and the skin on the back of my neck felt burnt to hell. I wrapped my shorts around my neck and kept going. It wasn't long before I reached the edge of a cliff. The island wasn't that large, and from this vantage point, I could look out over the forested inland and just barely see the edge of my beach. I squinted, looking for any source of fresh water. It had to be here somewhere. Those monkey things must have a way to get water. Seeing nothing, I sank down next to a rock and leaned against it, gazing out over the cliff edge, which was maybe 20 to 30 feet away from the ocean surface below. I took a drink of my water and decided to rest a moment before I made the trek back. I was going to need a weapon. Some sort of spear or something. I had to find a way to get inland. The waves crashed against the rocks below, and I was just about to get up when a dark shape in the water caught my attention. I crawled closer to the edge and peered down. The shape shifted under the water, its center mass with long tendrils waving with the tide. Was that one of the monster things that had killed my kidnappers, and almost me? But then I remembered the way I'd been grabbed and driven to shore, then left there. Like a rescue. I wondered many times if I'd imagined all of that, or misunderstood the intentions of the creature. Suddenly the mass surged closer to shore, and I gasped as blue tentacle arms shot out of the water and wrapped around a rock jutting from the surface. The suckers latched on moments before 2 hands grasped the edge. The creature breached the surface, and my heart pounded a mile a minute. The creature was sort of humanoid, if you discounted the blue scaly skin and tentacles. It had a head with curled black horns and a muscled torso. It hauled itself onto the rock and rested there, long dark hair hiding its face. It had a tail, too, and it mixed with the tentacles that were now slowly shrinking as the water beaded on its body like a duck's feathers. Slowly it rose on 2 legs, bare feet gripping the rock as it shook its hair and leaned its face to the sky. "Oh my God," I whispered. The creature was nude, and a large blue cock jutted from his groin, soft but nonetheless long. And his face was something to behold. A square jaw and high, sharp cheekbones, full lips. A series of bony nubs lined his prominent brow. Slits in his neck pulsed and then slowly faded while his tentacles shriveled up until they were only small nubs along his ribcage. He ran his large hands through his hair, and I watched as it settled on his shoulders in beachy waves I'd never been able to achieve. Captivated by this creature, I crept forward another step. My hand bumped a small rock, sending it skittering down the cliff. Immediately the creature went into a crouch, his head coming up to settle purple eyes right on me as his lips peeled back into a fanged hiss. I shrieked and stumbled away from the edge. I didn't stop there. I ran back the way I had come, glancing behind me continuously to see if that creature had somehow scaled the cliff with his tentacle arms and was coming after me. I didn't stop running until I once again touched sand, and even then I jogged, panting and sweating. When I reached my leaf, I collapsed. Curling into a ball, I covered myself with my thick blanket and remained there, shaking and trembling. It wasn't until the sun began to set that I finally ventured out and nibbled on some food, despite my knotted stomach. Who was he? What was he? I'd been so close to calling out to him, to saying hello, desperate for some companionship. But what if he was one of the creatures who'd wanted to eat me? While he was the only living being other than the monkey creatures I'd seen on this island, I couldn't know for sure he was the one bringing me food. I fingered my anklet, letting the tears fall now that the adrenaline of my flight had worn off. I wanted to meet who was taking care of me. I wanted to ask why, and most of all, I wanted to know what that purple-eyed alien was. He'd been so masculine, familiar yet completely foreign. Had I been wrong to run away? Maybe I'd just startled him. Ugh, I didn't know what to think. I tried to stay awake as the sun set, but as the island was plunged into darkness, I rested on my side and closed my eyes. Would I wake up tomorrow to more gifts? I told myself, even if I did, that I had to start learning my own survival skills. For the next 3 days, the gifts still came, and while I was grateful, I had stopped relying on them. I'd managed to make a crude spear and caught a couple crab-like creatures. They tasted not great, but at least they were protein. I smeared myself with mud to prevent sunburn and began a schedule of exercising in order to make myself stronger. I tired easily trying to spear my food, and that just wouldn't do. I had to get fit. So I ran some cardio on the beach and worked on some push-ups and squats. I even fashioned a little pull-up bar. My latest task that had been taking up a lot of my time was desalinating the ocean water. I would have killed for a life straw delivery from Amazon, but since that wasn't available on this island, I had to try to recall every single survival tip I'd ever read or watched in my life. Where was Bear Grylls when you needed him? I set up a makeshift station, remembering the trick of evaporating salt water and drinking condensation, which took me way too long to find the proper supplies, such as a thin leaf to act as plastic film. By the time I had my station set up, the sun was setting, and I took the time to sit on the sand, marveling at how large the sun was here. I'd come to the conclusion this was not Earth. It had taken me a few days, mostly because of denial, but the air here was heavier. The waves rippled in an odd, varied rhythm I'd never seen before. And, well, tentacle creatures existed here. There was no way I could be on a planet in our solar system, so where the hell was I? Sighing, I stood up and took a step when I felt the ground beneath me began to shake. I froze and immediately dropped into a crouch. Was this an earthquake? Or a whatever planet quake? I was out in the open, so I wasn't in danger of any trees falling on me, so I was safest here, I figured. Until a strange sound reached my ears, and I realized the ground was less shaking and more vibrating. The sound grew louder, and with trepidation I peered over my shoulder out into the ocean. There on the horizon, speeding toward me, was a large object, hovering just above the surface of the water like a hovercraft. Was this a rescue? But the closer it came, the more foreign the aircraft looked. And just when I stood up, I caught a glimpse of a face standing at the forefront of the large windows in the front. It had a mouthful of fangs set in a V-shaped face, and it was pointing right at me. I had a sinking feeling this was far from rescue, and my situation was about to get a whole hell of a lot worse. I whirled around and raced inland, scrabbling up the sand as best as I could. I hadn't even made it halfway to the tree line when the hovercraft, moving at a speed that seemed wholly not possible, reached land. A dozen or so creatures jumped out on 3-hoofed feet, heading right toward me. I stumbled on a soft patch of sand and went down. That was when I opened my mouth and screamed bloody murder. Chapter 4. Sierra. Their eyes shone greedily, and I wished desperately for a weapon. They spoke as they rushed toward me, one talking in some sort of floating device in front of his mouth.
Cargo reacquired. Possession imminent.
Oh, fuck no. Possession was not imminent. I scrambled to my feet with fistfuls of sand, ready to throw it into their weird orb eyes, when a loud crunch and splash drew their attention. I stared, the sand sifting from my slack fingers as massive tentacles ripped their ship into pieces. The creatures in front of me turned, holding gun-like objects in front of them as a dark form surfaced in the shallow tide. My jaw dropped. It was the creature I'd seen on the other side of the island, the blue-scaled alien with tentacles. Nude, he strode purposefully on 2 legs, his torso a mass of muscle and sinew. His expression was a mask of rage, his lips peeled back in a snarl with white fangs gleaming. Purple eyes glowed fiercely as his long tentacles, branched out from his ribs, swept the newcomers off their feet with one massive swipe. If that wasn't enough, he crossed his wrists in an X at his neck, and long black blades rose from the skin along the outside of his forearms, from wrist to elbow. The invaders screamed, laser shots were fired, but the blue alien kept coming. His tentacles ripped limbs, and what he couldn't rip he sliced with his blades. Cries echoed from the dying invaders while their wrecked ship began to wash up onto the shore in pieces. One of the creatures managed to evade his attention and grabbed for me as I watched the massacre. "Fuck off!" I screeched in his face and tore my hand from his grip. With an aggressive curse, his spit flying, he hauled back and slammed a fist into my jaw. Pain exploded through my skull, and I immediately tasted the iron tang of blood inside my mouth. I hit the sand like a sack, coughing up spittle and blood. A roar reached my ears, and I gazed up through my blurry vision to see the blue creature stomping toward us, rage swimming in his purple eyes. I couldn't get up, weakened by shock and that blow to the head. I couldn't do anything but sit there and wait for the blue alien to cut me to ribbons like everyone else. This had to be his home, and we'd invaded. But instead he went for the creature who'd hit me. With a vicious slash of his tail, he took my attacker off his feet. As soon as he hit the sand, the blue alien slashed his forearms across the creature's throat, nearly decapitating him. I gagged, sick to my stomach from the pain and the blood. The blue alien turned to me and stood for a moment, massive chest heaving as blood and other fluids and matter dripped from it. All around us lay creatures dead and dying. Not one stood alive. This creature from the depths had taken on a dozen, slaughtering them in minutes. I stared up at him, unable to do anything else with my brain knocked around in my skull. He reached for me, and I cringed. He hesitated just a moment, his jaw tight, before scooping me up from the sand. His touch was surprisingly gentle. He held me against his chest protectively, and I had no idea what his plan was until he headed right for the ocean. I panicked then. Was he going to drown me? That was a terrible way to die, although I didn't want my throat ripped open either. When I struggled in his arms, he glanced down at me and murmured something. I couldn't understand him like I could the other aliens. His words were gibberish, but his tone wasn't angry. Was he sad he had to drown me? "Please," I pleaded, "don't drown me. I'll be good. I'll stay on my side of the island, I promise." He waded through the incoming waves, and a few soaked my hair as I clung to him. Suddenly his chest began to vibrate, an odd, steady hum that for some reason calmed the racing of my heart. I stared up at him. "What?" He said another word, and I managed to take a gulp of air before he plunged us underwater. For a moment, I saw nothing, but then I caught sight of his tentacles swirling around us, propelling us at a fast speed through the water. It felt like when I'd first landed in this ocean, and something had grabbed me and pulled me to the shore. Had it been him? If so, why would he kill me now? He glanced down at me, and I was sure I looked nuts with bulging cheeks full of air. My lungs were already screaming as I exhaled, the bubbles rising to the surface. His fingers closed around my nose, and my heart nearly stopped with fear. I thought for sure I was going to cough and ingest a mouthful of water when his neck gills flapped. He bent his neck and sealed his lips over mine. I struggled again, terrified, until his lips pried mine open and he forced air into my mouth. I inhaled, blinking at him as blessed air filled my lungs. He pulled back, and I exhaled. Another neck gill flap, and then he was there again, breathing air into my lungs. That was how it went for a while until the sunlight seemed to brighten through the water, and we burst out onto the surface. I sputtered and gasped as I took in my surroundings. We were on the other side of the island, as the cliff rose into the sky in front of us, while the waves crashed on rocks nearby. I never would have swam here, as the current was vicious, but my blue alien was in full control, making his way closer to the cliff until his tentacles grasped a ledge. He lifted us into the air, and once he touched his feet on the edge of the ledge, he let me down on a dense patch of soft moss. This wasn't just a ledge. It was a cave carved into the cliff. The sun beat down on us, and his tentacles, now out of the water, slowly began to shrink back into his ribs until only small nubs remained, just like I'd seen before. I glanced down the ledge, but there was no way in hell I could jump. I'd be a Sierra pancake when those waves smashed me up against the cliff face. So I was trapped here, with this tentacle alien who remained crouched at my side. He prodded my face, and the muscles in his cheek bulged as his eyes seemed to flare. I shied away from his touch, and he immediately withdrew his fingers. His shoulders slumped, and he ran his thick palm over his dark hair. I didn't know what to do. He'd saved me, but for what purpose? Or was he the one who kept giving me gifts? "Are you going to hurt me?" I whispered, wincing at the tremble in my voice. His eyes flared again, and he leaned closer. I reached for him but stopped when I spotted something on my wrists. I tried to pick it off, thinking it was some sort of seaweed. When the skin began to burn and sting, "What?" I gasped as two parallel black lines appeared on my skin, running the circumference of my wrists like a bracelet. The blue alien made a noise in astonishment, and I thought he was referring to my wrist when I looked at him, only to see him also staring at his own hands. The black marks were on his wrists too. Penned there like an invisible tattoo gun was running along our skin. When the lines were complete, a pattern began to emerge in black between them, a series of shapes that looked very much like tentacles. The lines glowed a bright white before dulling to a shiny gold. I stared at my wrists, then his, unsure what was going on and why we suddenly had matching magical tattoos. My head pounded, and I worried I was hallucinating. My skull swelled like it was going to burst open from being too full, and then suddenly I felt something inside my mind. Another presence, a thing, and when I glanced at the blue alien, he stared at me with impossibly round eyes. He reached for me, slowly, and when he did, some shapes in my mind shifted, forming into soft tendrils that made me feel cradled, protected. His hand touched my jaw, and I shivered at his touch. The tendrils were hesitant, but trying to be gentle, a little confused. Just like how the blue alien was touching me now. Was this feeling in my mind him? "Who are you?" I whispered. He didn't speak for a long moment, his gaze studying my face before he said one word.
Quist.
I slowly stretched out my arm to touch him voluntarily for the first time, laying my hand on his chest, which was warm and soft. His scales were almost fuzzy, like velour over armor. "Quist," I echoed. He repeated the word, and I was going to go with that being his name for now. With my other hand, I touched my own chest. "Sierra," I said. Again, he studied my face, and the tendrils in my mind grew a little bolder, exploring the depths of my thoughts.
Sierra,
he said a little awkwardly. I nodded and smiled. His lips stretched into what I thought was a grin, and my breath left my body. Sure, he was alien. He didn't have eyebrows. He had gills, tentacles, and was blue. But when he smiled, there was something about him that made my heart skip a beat. My belly tingled and my skin warmed. "Were you the one leaving me gifts?" I asked. He cocked his head and his forehead nubs dipped in confusion. "Another day," I murmured. "A question for another day." I was still woozy from the blow to the head, and every word hurt to speak as I stretched my swollen jaw. Immediately, Quist's expression changed. He once again hauled me into his arms and stalked into the cave. As the darkness of the shadows swallowed us up, I thought to myself I was going to jump into this with both feet. He had saved me. He was kind so far, and I'd work like hell to keep surviving.
Quist. I could barely believe the locks had appeared on my wrist. Locks for her. This female named Sierra, who wasn't a Drixonian, but still stirred emotions in me I'd long thought dead. Her presence in my mind was a warm light, and I wanted to turn my face into it like a plant. I'd made a mistake, and it had nearly cost me my Cora Eternal. I had wanted to catch a yissel for her, a tasty delicacy I thought she would like, and so I'd ventured farther from home than I preferred. When I heard the vibrations of the Harazian's ship, I thought my Cora would stop. When I saw the Harazian slam his fist into her head, I lost myself. I hadn't meant to make the sand slick with their blood, but there had been no other option. My female had been hurt, and even now I could barely look at the sight of her swollen flesh. I set her down on a blanket of hops, just like the one I'd made for her shelter. She let out a small moan of pain that set my teeth on edge. I bundled another blanket for her head, and she gingerly laid on it, watching my every movement. I could feel her indecision in my head as the light dimmed and flickered. I wished we could communicate. I saw the translator implant behind her ear, but the Harazians wouldn't have downloaded my language on it. After settling a skin of quaw near her, as well as a few fruits and dried meats from my food stores, I resisted touching her as she ate slowly, wincing as she chewed with her sore jaw. I needed to return to the beach to ensure that the Harazians were dead, and to see if there was anything I could salvage from their ship. More importantly, I wanted to retrieve Sierra's possessions. I had spent much time and energy obtaining those for her, and when I'd observed her, she'd taken great care of all of them. My gaze dipped to the jewels she wore on her chest, and felt a small amount of pride swell in my chest. I'd provided that pretty thing for her. Of course, as soon as I saw her swollen face, my pride quickly vanished. I had failed her once, but I wouldn't fail again. "I need to leave and check the beach," I told her, even though I knew she couldn't understand me. She gazed up at me with round eyes. "I won't be long. You're safe here." She swallowed a gulp of quaw and then nodded slowly. Maybe my presence in her mind gave her a small amount of confidence I'd never harm her. How would we get through this communication barrier? The future seemed daunting for me and my Cora Eternal. But I was also so grateful that Fatas, after all she'd put me through, had blessed me with this, a female meant for me. I reached out and lightly ran my hand down the side of her head. She didn't flinch away from my touch, and I considered that a victory. I quickly rose and strode out of my cave. I didn't stop as I dove off the ledge straight into the water. My tentacles lengthened, and I sped through the water quickly, already feeling a little ill that I'd left her alone. But in order to ensure our safety, I needed to search the beach. When I arrived back at the scene of the near capture, I saw scavengers had already picked at the bodies. One by one, I carried the rest of them out to the freshest for other predators to feast on. The Horazian ship was in 2 large pieces washed up on the shore. I grimaced at the destruction. I'd done that, nearly feral with rage. But I couldn't take it back now. I should have thought ahead and kept it intact. Maybe I could have used it to get the female somewhere else safe. I shook my head. No, she was safest with me. I had a momentary lapse of judgment, but that wouldn't happen again. I could feel her in my mind, her light soft and dimmed, so I knew she was sleeping and content. Digging through the wreckage of the ship took time, but it was worth it. In exchange for a few cuts on my hands and arms from the twisted metal, I scored some freeze-dried meal packs, clothing I could alter to fit Sierra as well as shoes for her delicate feet, and several other odds and ends. But the real find was when I dug through a watertight bag and found a translator implant updater. My chorus soared, and I couldn't hold back the grin on my face. This was it. This was what I needed to communicate with my female. After bundling her supplies under her shelter, I stuffed all my new possessions into the watertight bag I'd acquired from the Horazian ship and plunged back into the water. When I reached my cave, Sierra was still asleep, breathing deeply. I took the time to organize my cave and clean up the debris. Then I made a small fire and sat down next to her, waiting eagerly for when she woke.
Chapter 5. Sierra. I opened my eyes to the low glow of a small fire. Surprisingly, my head didn't pound, and when I prodded my jaw, the pain was moderate. The skin wasn't as tight as it was before. That was surprising.
Let's take a moment to pause from the story and enjoy a few peaceful minutes of music, just for your relaxation. This free audiobook is our gift to you. Thank you for being here.
Surely I should still be swollen? With a groan, I sat up and nearly jumped out of my skin when I found the blue alien sitting on his haunches a foot away staring at me. He wasn't nude anymore, as he'd pulled on a pair of short pants, frayed at the ends, which did nothing to hide his muscled thighs. His eyes glowed in the firelight, and I told myself to calm down until my gaze dropped to the object clutched in his clawed fingers. A gun. At least, it looked like a gun, and I immediately backed away from him as goosebumps broke out over my skin. Seriously? Did he bring me up here only to shoot me? "What is that?" I asked as I pointed at the gun. "What do you have it for?" His tendrils reached for me in my mind, almost placating, which only annoyed me. "What is that?" I asked again, nearly frantic as he followed my retreat with careful steps. "Quist," I begged with tears in my eyes as the panic began to take hold. "Please don't hurt me." His muscles bunched in his shoulders as he murmured a few words in a deep, gentle tone that did nothing to calm me. Suddenly he reached out and grabbed me. I screamed, but there was no way to break his hold. He lifted the gun up to my head, and I lashed out with my nails. They glanced off his scales ineffectually. I heard a click and felt a burning pain behind my ear. "No!" I cried out as my vision blurred. But then as quickly as the pain had come, it subsided, and I was still alive. I reached back to prod my ear and only felt the disc that was embedded in the skin there. Had he done something to that?
Sierra,
He murmured my name.
can you understand me?
I blinked at him, convinced I was dreaming. "What?" He frowned at the gun and smacked it with his hand.
Flecking thing doesn't work. Did water get in it?
My mouth dropped open. "Quist." He lifted his head, eyes hopeful. I swallowed and nodded. "I can understand you." His nostrils flared and he surged toward me until our faces were inches away.
What is your language?
"English, from planet Earth." He fiddled around with the dial on the gun for a while until he found what he was looking for with an excited exclamation. Then he held the device up to his own ear, firing it there. He didn't even flinch as he lowered the gun and met my gaze.
Say something.
I felt like I was on a first date or something. Hello." He exhaled loudly, and his chest retracted as he dropped to his ass. The gun fell from his slack fingers.
Hello,
he whispered, eyes bright. "So we can talk now?" He nodded.
I found the translator implant updater on the Horazian ship.
Horazian?
The ones on the beach.
We stared at each other awkwardly. I wasn't sure what to say. "Do you know what they wanted with me?" He hesitated a beat before answering me.
Nothing good.
I swallowed my nerves. "And you?" He spoke in a soft tone that seemed in such contrast to his size.
Everything good.
My heart pulsed, and once again my skin broke out in goosebumps, but this time the feeling had nothing to do with fear. I glanced around, spotting my possessions from the beach piled neatly nearby. Reaching out, I fingered the soft blanket as realization dawned. "Were you the one who kept bringing me food? And all these supplies?" He nodded slowly. "I don't understand. Who are you?"
I'm a Drixonian warrior.
He opened his mouth as if to say more, but firmly shutting his jaw and looking away. "So there are more like you?" I glanced out of the cave, but his response brought my attention back to him.
No.
"No? Oh no, were they extinct?"
There are more Drixonian warriors, but none like me.
"None like you? What do you mean?"
I have been changed.
He pointed to the slits in his neck and the nubs on his ribcage where his tentacles grew.
You saw these?
I nodded.
I'm the only Drixonian I know who is amphibious.
So evolution did you dirty? He made a gurgling sound in his throat that might have been a laugh.
The Eldani did me dirty. Our enemies. They stole me, experimented on me, and turned me into this. They tossed me aside when I was nearly killed by a port cruiler. They didn't have a use for me anymore, as injured as I was.
He pointed to a long scar on his shoulder that I hadn't noticed before. What the hell? I would have loved to get my hands on these fucking Eldani.
A port what? A tentacle monster that lives in the depths. His lips tilted up into a small smile. I can beat them now. When your ship crashed, that was what killed the Horazians in the water. Why didn't it kill me? He blinked slowly, lazily. Because I was there. For some reason, those 4 words sent a bolt of heat straight to my core. Did you push me to the shore? Was that you? That was me. So you've been taking care of me this whole time? I have been trying, he answered. You did well on your own. Why didn't you show yourself to me? He looked away, and I got the sense he was ashamed. I knew you'd be scared of me. But I'm a deformed monster. I stared at him. Well, damn. Quist needed therapy. Scooting closer, I placed a hand on his thigh. The muscles bunched beneath my palm. You're not. Everything you are kept you alive. Saved me. Despite what you've been through, you still have a big enough heart to protect some human who clearly doesn't belong here. I paused. Where are we anyway? He made another gurgling sound. Rinian Galaxy. Planet Torin. Huh? I muttered. Well, I'm a far way from home. He nodded. I'm sorry I can't take you there. I can't be away from the water for long. I shook my head. Not your responsibility to get me home. You are my responsibility, he insisted, taking my hand and pressing it to his chest. I resisted, curling my fingers into the solid muscle there. You are my Cora Eternal. Your what? He held up our matching wrist markings. We have matching locks. In all the excitement of learning we could communicate, that major important fact had slipped to the back of my mind. But now the questions came roaring to the front. Yeah, about that. What the hell are these? Why do I seem to feel you up here? I stabbed a finger at my temple. He drew me closer, and it was like my body instinctively knew I could trust him. That this was my rightful place, because I seemed to melt against him. His tone had gone low and husky, the vibrations rumbling where my hardening nipples brushed his chest. These are locks, he said. It means that Fatas has chosen us for each other. You are my Cora Eternal. My implant roughly translated that as forever love. It is a rare pairing for Drixonian, but I'm grateful, he went on. I watched you every day. I saw how brave you were, how you worked hard for your own survival. I didn't know who was bringing me gifts or when they would stop, I explained. I tentatively swiped at his hair, and the strands felt a bit like bird feathers, soft with an oily coating, which made sense if he was underwater a lot. I wish you would have shown yourself to me earlier. I'm sorry I wasn't courageous enough. I smiled. You were when it counted. But you were still hurt. I shrugged. I barely feel it anymore, which is odd. It's the mate bond, he said. You will heal quicker. Well, isn't that handy? This is a lot to take in. Humans don't have anything like this. Human, he murmured. So that's what you are. I nodded. So now what? He swallowed. I can try to get you to a populous Drixonian settlement, but I wouldn't be able to stay on land forever. Then why would I demanded. I thought you just said we were bonded. I did, but I want you to be happy. I spread my arms. Then I guess I have to be happy here, with you. That's okay, right? Is this cave big enough for the two of us? He bent his neck back and rumbled a laugh to the ceiling. I liked the sound. Maybe I should have gone to school to be a therapist. Look at me making this depressed alien lab rat laugh. There's plenty of room, my Sierra. Suddenly his eyes rounded, and he stood, pulling me with him. I want to show you something. Do you trust me? Yes, I said without hesitation. Sure, I felt a little crazy, but he was in my head. I could feel his sincerity. He picked me up and ran full tilt toward the ledge outside the cave. I clung to him as the wind whipped my hair. Quist, wait! But he had already dove off the cliff, his massive body curled around mine so that when we hit the water, I didn't feel the impact at all.
For a moment, I panicked as the water cut off my air supply, but then Quist was there, his lips on mine, blowing oxygen into my lungs. As he pulled back, his tentacles swirled around us, 4 on each side of his ribcage. With his arms wrapped around mine, he propelled us farther into the ocean, away from the waves crashing against the cliff face. As we swam deeper, he pointed out various ocean life with either a point of his finger or a tap of his tentacle. Bright-colored creatures swam by us. One had a ring of fur around its head like a muppet, and another waved a spiny tail at us that Quist knocked away easily with a swipe of his tentacle. But not before I caught a spark on the end, and made a note to avoid getting shocked by that creature. He wanted to show me his world, I realized, and that made my chest swell with happiness. How long had he been alone? Every time I felt my lungs begin to burn, Quist was there, being my lungs. Next, we sped through a field of underwater flowers, massive blooms which rose up from the bottom like sunflowers. I kicked away from him then and swam through them, causing bubbles of laughter to rise to the surface. I felt like a kid in a candy store. So many new sights. I gazed up at Quist, backlit by the sun streaming through the water. He was something else with his long dark hair spread out all around him, like a tentacled Aquaman. Eventually he grabbed for me, and we continued to swim. I hadn't realized we were returning until we burst to the surface near the cliff face. This area was a little calmer with shelves of rocks rising almost like stairs to a lower section of the cliff. Somewhere along the way, Quist had lost the meager amount of clothing he'd been wearing, and I only wore a pair of panties and my shirt, which I'd long ago cut into a crop top. The top was soaked, and despite the coolness of the water, my skin was hot. My nipples pebbled as Quist lifted me onto a rock with his tentacles, heat in his eyes. I might have been a little crazy, but this mating bond was something else. I could feel how badly he wanted me, and how much he revered me. That made me wet, far wetter than the whole damn ocean in front of me, especially when he tore the panties from my body and buried his face between my legs. His tongue unfurled like a ribbon, and I caught the glimmer of 3 ball piercings along the center before he licked up my center like a lollipop. I cried out as I grabbed a fistful of his hair. He didn't miss my clit, not once, zeroing in on it like he knew it had been there all along. Mad with the pulsing lust in my mind and the ache in my core, I rode his mouth with abandon, there on an ocean rock for whomever to see. But I wasn't thinking about that. This moment was only us, only his tongue on my flesh, his tentacles flicking my nipples and his hands grasping my ass. His tongue entered me like a bullet, and when he began a deep vibration in his chest that carried out through his tongue, I saw stars. When I came, I screamed out his name until my throat was raw. Only then did he climb up on the rock with me, dripping with salt water, hair slicked back like a blue god, and said, "Please, Core Eternal, let me take you." And of course I nodded yes, because I was out of my mind, clearly, even after cumming my brains out. He knelt between my thighs and hauled me upright with his tentacles before spearing me on that massive cock that I'd only seen at a distance. That massive pierced cock. How had I missed that? He stuffed me full, his satisfied groans seeming to release all the pent-up emotions he'd been suppressing all alone here on this rock. "Sierra," he said, holding my gaze with his impossibly blue eyes. "The sweet cunt is made for me." I almost came again from those words. His tentacles wrapped around my thighs, suspending me in the air and holding me upright so that I could do nothing but allow him to plunge me down on his cock repeatedly. His hands constantly caressed me, and his tongue murmured sweet, hot words. I felt a tugging on my clit and jerked in his hold until I looked down to find a node at the top of his cock had extended to latch onto my clit, and it was sucking. "Oh, fuck," I moaned, my head back, my body convulsing as I came in his arms. Tentacles? All over his cock. He followed me a moment later, roaring out his orgasm as he spent his release inside of me. Then his tentacles pulled me closer, until his arms wrapped around me, and we fell to the rock, him once again cradling me so I landed on his warm body, and not the cold, hard rock. I panted, staring out at the waves lapping the cliff face, and the occasional call of some small winged creatures in the sky. His hand ran up and down my spine in a soothing caress. His tentacles in my mind were calm, languid, and I knew he was content.
"I've been alone for a long time," he said, his voice low. "I don't know how long. Maybe 10 to 15 cycles."
Cycles?
Rotations around the sun.
Oh, so like years. I'm so sorry, Quist.
I never thought I'd meet a female again, let alone one like you. So brave, so perfect for me. I've never been with a female.
That got my attention. Sorry?
All our females died when I was young. Only Drixonian male warriors are left.
I felt my eyes bugging out. Then how do you know how to... I gestured down my body. Do all of that? He smiled, and I loved when he smiled. He looked younger, less weighted down by sorrow.
The elder warriors taught us, just in case.
Well, thank you, elders, I murmured. His chest shook with silent laughter. Do you want to see the other warriors again? Ever? He sighed and rubbed a hand through his hair.
Someday, maybe. I don't know that I would be of use to them. I have been lonely, but now I have you.
He held my gaze.
You'll really stay?
I laughed. Where else would I go? He didn't laugh with me.
Would you leave if you could?
I patted his cheek. Would I return to Earth if given the chance? Maybe. Or I'd at least want to get a message to my loved ones that I'm okay. I'm alive. But the thought of leaving you, a shudder ran down my spine. That fills me with dread. I want to stay with you, Quist. We can make a home here together, you and I, Blue Lagoon style.
Blue Lagoon?
I waved a hand. Don't worry about it. I propped a fist on his chest. So, where to next, big guy? I'm kind of hungry.
My mate needs food?
His smile was back. He seemed to always perk up at the opportunity to take care of me. How did I score the alien planet's savior jackpot? I nodded. Yep. He wrapped his arms around me and began to roll us to the edge of the rock.
Then let's get my mate some food.
I was still laughing when we hit the water with a splash. Epilogue. Sierra. So this little island wasn't so bad. With Quist at my side, we could explore everything. The monkey-like creatures, which he called munkas, didn't come near us. They were terrified of Quist, and I thought they were smart after all. In addition to the spikes that rose from his forearms, weapons all Drixonians had, he also had spikes starting from the top of his head down to the base of his tail. He couldn't be out of water long. I estimated a few hours at most. So I grew used to him leaving a few times in the night to plunge himself in the ocean. The fresh-ass, as he called it. He could breathe out of water, but his skin needed to stay hydrated, or it would start to turn brittle, and he'd begin to lose mobility in his limbs. Inland, we found plenty of fresh water. Well, he called it qua. But it was pretty much water, just with a slight vinegar aftertaste. We hunted fresh game, and he taught me how to fish. That was the best part. He taught me survival techniques. He was terrified something would happen to him, and I would be left helpless. It had been what I estimated as weeks since I'd first washed up on shore, thanks to him, and my body had changed. I was always relatively fit, but now my arms were corded with muscle, and I had the butt that I always dreamed of. Sometimes I still had moments of grieving and sadness over my lost home on Earth. Quist hated when I got weepy, but he understood. He'd lost his first home, after all. So he'd give me alone time to wallow, and then he would be there with some sort of jewelry or new seafood delicacy when I was finished. He truly was the best boyfriend. And the sex was, well, that was something else. In the water, out of the water, in trees, in the fresh streams, he couldn't keep his hands off me, and I was fine with it. until my period stopped, and then I began to panic. I just assumed we couldn't procreate, I snapped as I paced the cave floor. He sat in the corner, making himself appear as small as possible, because that's what he did when I was on a tear about something. He even nibbled on a claw like a naughty kid. I turned on him. Did you know? He shook his head quickly. No, Core Eternal. His tone was incredibly placating. I'm sorry. I placed a hand over my stomach, feeling slightly hysterical. Am I growing a horned baby in here? He winced at my shout. I don't know. I wilted to the floor with a groan and buried my head in my hands. A baby, on a stranded island, with horns, out of my vagina. Are you kidding me? I can take you to the Drixonians. I heard shuffling and knew he was creeping closer. They'll have healers. No, I jerked up to glare at him. He froze like a deer in headlights. See? I was already having mood swings. I do not want some strange warrior putting me in stirrups to stare at my crotch. We'll figure it out, right? I felt tears prick at my eyes. Tell me it'll be all right. He unfroze and slid the rest of the way to me, gathering me in his arms while I cried pitiful tears. His hand ran up and down my back in soothing circles. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It will be all right. We'll get through this together. I sniffled. I'm sorry for yelling at you. I'm just scared. I know, he said. I can feel how scared you are. Right. We could never hide anything from each other. But I'm being a bitch. You're probably so happy about this, right? You thought the Drixonians would die out, and now here I am with a chance to give you a child. He smiled softly. Sure, I'm happy. But I'm also worried about you. But it'll be all right? It'll be all right. I twirled my fingers in his hair. It's not that I don't want a child with you. I always wanted to be a mom. This is a blessing as long as my uterus can withstand horns. Drixonian chits are born with soft nubs. They harden and grow over time. Oh, I bit my lips. Well, that's good news. He grasped my face and pressed a gentle kiss to my nose. I know you can do this, my Cora Eternal. You'll be a great mother, and we'll raise our chit here to be happy and healthy. Okay, I sighed, returning his smile. If you say so. As my belly grew round, Quist doted on me while I turned into a moody bitch. He traveled farther from the island than he ever had before. His words, to bring me ocean delicacies. I ate them until the sight of them made me sick. When I got a craving for peanut butter, he spent 3 whole days traipsing inland, hunting some legumes and grinding them into a paste. When I gagged and cried because they tasted horrible, he only rubbed my back and apologized. In my head, I knew he was doing everything he could, but my hormones were raging, and all I could think about was giving birth on this damn island all alone. My fear manifested into bitchiness, until I felt like Quist kept making excuses to leave me alone to get away from my sharp tongue. He hadn't touched me sexually for weeks, maybe months, and all that did was increase my fear and anxiety. He was all I had on this island. He was all I had in my life. Just when I'd gotten somewhat used to this new normal, my womb decided to grow a baby, and now everything had changed. No matter how hard I tried to be mature and brave and strong, my emotions wouldn't do anything but swing wildly and think up nightmare scenarios for my future. I wanted to want this baby, but I was fucking terrified. And then I felt guilty over not being excited. I had no one else to talk to, no one to let me know that my conflicting feelings were okay. The guilt and loneliness built until I felt like I couldn't take it anymore. My feelings came to a head when one day, unable to see below my bulging stomach, I stubbed my toe on a rock in the cave. Red-faced with a hobbling march, I hollered at Quist, who stood in the mouth of our cave, dripping wet and holding the day's catch. I thought you swept. I told you I can't see below this stupid belly, and bending over hurts. Quist's mouth drooped, and his shoulders slumped. His tendrils in my mind quivered and shrank. I am sorry, Cora Eternal. His response only made me angrier, because he always apologized when faced with my irrational hormonal rage. I wanted to fight. I wanted to be put in my place because right now I felt like my brain was scattered and my body was not my own. I stomped my foot, which only made my toe hurt more. "Quit apologizing!" Tearing my hands through my hair as my back protested my added weight for the millionth time, I screamed. "How come when I yell, you don't yell back at me?" I demanded. His eyes flared, which was the first indication in months that he was angry. "I don't want to yell at you." How the hell could I pick a fight with this perfect man? That only pissed me off more. I was a terrible human basket case, and he remained kind and patient. "Maybe I want you to yell back." Tears pricked my eyes, and I sniffed them back. I was so tired of crying. I was tired of all of this. You treat me like I'm going to break, and all that's doing is making me more fragile. Quist's head cocked, and he dropped the dead fish in his claws. It hit the ground with a wet slap. The sound echoed in the cave, and something about the way his muscles tensed sent a skitter of tingles down my spine. "You want me to treat you tough?" I wasn't quite sure what I wanted, but I knew it wasn't his endless coddling. "Maybe." The only warning I heard was a ferocious snap of his tentacles in my mind. One minute, he was at the mouth of the cave, and the next he was in front of me with a fist in my hair and his mouth on mine. He'd rarely been this aggressive sexually, and my body immediately reacted to it, instinctively knowing he was my mate, my love. Goosebumps broke out all over my skin as his tongue swept into my mouth. My thighs clenched, my belly bumped his stomach, and I drew back. "Quist!" "No, core eternal," he snapped, a deep rumbling that held just enough anger to draw my full attention. "I have been gentle, as you are human, but I see now what you need." I wasn't even sure what I needed. He hauled me in the air, and I let out a squeal. But he handled my new body shape with ease and shoved me down onto the bed pallet face first while cradling my belly. I only wore a long shirt, which he shoved up my back to expose my ass. Wetness gushed between my legs as his fingers prodded my slick flesh. "Quist," I moaned. His body coated mine, and no more foreplay was needed as just the position had me soaked. His cock nudged my entrance. "I should have done this every time you yelled and cried." He slid inside me with a strong push, and the air rushed from my lungs. I felt tighter, shallower, and his cock-piercing slid along my walls with a delicious glide. God, he just felt so much bigger. His chest pressed against my back, and then his lips were at my ear as he rocked into me. "I know you don't feel like yourself, but this is who you are. This is us. We are Quist and Sierra, and we have a beautiful life." He gripped a handful of my ass, and I moaned. "Yes, Quist." "From now on, whenever you fly apart, I will put you back together just like this." "Yes," I hissed as he changed position. "That's my core eternal," he growled, and then began to fuck me in earnest. I couldn't think, could barely breathe. I could only feel the fullness of his cock, hear his grunts in my ear, and revel in the heat of his body covering mine. My mind blanked, and I came whimpering and crying on his cock, with tears streaming down my face as he emptied his release inside of me. I slumped on our bed pallet, drifting in and out of a sated happiness while Quist cleaned me, held a water skin to my lips, and then covered us with a fern blanket. He curled his body around mine as we lay on our sides, with his big hand resting on my belly. Our baby kicked out, and I smiled. "She's awake," he murmured in my ear. "He is playing soccer with my bladder." Quist chuckled. We liked to argue over the gender. We lay in silence for a while until Quist spoke again. "I know you are scared, but I will not let anything happen to my family. You will no longer pick fights, and whenever you try, I will feed you my cock until you are sleepy and quiet like this. Do you understand?" I nodded, happy as a clam for once in a long time. "I know you are strong, Sierra, even if you think you are not. And when you aren't feeling tough, I'm strong enough for both of us. I was allowing your emotional tantrums because I thought it was what you needed. Clearly, it is not. So from now on, I will be firmer." I blinked as tears slid out of the corner of my eyes. He brushed at a drop on my cheek.
I know I'm right, so why are you sad?
I sniffed. I'm not sad.
But your eyes are leaking.
I can cry from happiness, too. He was quiet for a while.
I did not know this.
I'm sorry. I know I've been hard to live with. I didn't tell you what I wanted because I wasn't sure. I only knew I was scared and worried that things would change.
They will change, Core Eternal, but they will change in a good way.
His hand smoothed over my belly.
I should have recognized what you needed earlier. Your warm light in my mind has been dim and scattered, but now you are glowing strong and bright.
I placed a hand over his on my stomach and felt another kick or punch from within. All this time, I had felt hesitant to enjoy the pregnancy, too scared of what was to come. I have felt scattered, and I've been so worried about the birth that I haven't let myself be happy about being a mother. And that made me feel guilty.
You should not feel guilty for that,
he said. The validation of my feelings made my eyes sting all over again.
You don't have to feel unbridled joy. I wish you would have told me sooner how you were feeling, so I could talk you through it. So you will in the future.
He didn't ask, he demanded, and the knowledge that I could unburden myself on him fled away the last vestiges of fear. I will. I'll tell you.
And if not?
If not, I get a dicking down, he snorted in my ear.
Yes, Core Eternal, that's what you get.
Reaching deep into my mind, I finally let myself feel my child. A warm swell of water rippled around Quist's tentacles. My baby was there, waiting for me, and I smiled. Excitement and pride swelled in my chest for what Quist and I had created together. I can't wait to meet him, I whispered.
And I can't wait to meet her,
he answered. 6 months later, I gave birth to a little blue baby with small horned nubs, no tail, and freckles. We named her Trist, and she was perfect. This concludes Rescued from the Depths by Ella Maven, narrated by Heather Costa and Jeffrey Kafer. Copyright 2022 by Ella Maven. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Ella Maven, care of Corvisiero Literary Agency, and was produced in the year 2024 by Tantor Media Incorporated, a division of Recorded Books, which holds the copyright thereto. Please visit Tantor.com for more information on our growing library of unabridged audiobooks.